I'm Keaton Fletcher, an assistant professor of industrial organizational psychology at Colorado State University.
And I'm Mariana Arvon, an organizational psychologist who specializes in organization and talent development.
And this is Healthy Work. All right, and welcome back to another episode of Healthy Work. I am so excited to be joined by two amazing guests today, and I will get out of the way and let you introduce yourselves.
Mike Zickar. I am a professor of industrial organizational psychology at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, and research interests are measurement, history of work, and I always love having health-related outcomes.
Great. And I'm Denise. I'm a postdoc at Saarland University here in Germany, and I'm focusing my research mostly on strikes and unions from a psychological perspective, and also quite recently politics at work.
Thank you so much. And that is why we're here today, because you two created a really cool collaborative paper at Occupational Health Science. And so I would just love it if you described to me the overall project and what it was that everyone said in this really cool paper.
Bob Sinclair, the editor of OHS, reached out to me. They do a series of papers like this that focus on events in the news and how it relates to occupational health. And so Mindy Bergman led a set of papers like this when the Dobbs decision came out, changing reproductive rights in the United States. And she wrote a series of papers about this. And there have been others around this as well. And so I was delighted to work with Denise on this. And Denise took the lead of sort of like filling out the paper and getting different scholars to participate, adding a real international flair to it. But that's how it came out, and we have a series of authors that maybe Denise can kind of run through some of the teams that were involved in this.
Yeah, sure. So with this paper in general, we try to highlight how unions contribute to workers' well-being in and also outside of the workplace. And as Mike said, we have this quite global perspective, which I really like. And we gathered 4 pieces from different authors with different backgrounds. So the first one is from a very international group of people, the O'Brien et al. Piece. They are from Australia. I think someone is in Belgium and the other one is in the UK, and they're mostly practitioners. So that's pretty cool to see what they think, how health and safety risks for workers can be addressed by unions. Then we have the piece by you, actually, Keaton, and your colleague, Kendall Stevenson, focusing on child labor legislation and how unions are involved and should be involved to prevent hazards with those. We also got one contribution from 2 German unionists focusing on Germany as one of the biggest economies worldwide and how unions try to reduce risks there for workers. And then we have a very nice ending piece from Somerville and Barling. They highlight 4 developments that are required, especially for researchers, I would say, and how they should collaborate with unions.
That's so cool. And I love the, like you mentioned, the international component to this. I feel like oftentimes some of our work done here in the US can be very US centric, and especially on these more like hot topics. But unions are an international topic. They are obviously very active around the world. And so I'm curious, bringing together these different collaborators and like project teams from around the world on different topics, what surprised you the most? Whether that was like what you read as you're reading these pieces coming in, or an aspect of trying to integrate these different perspectives?
I'll just jump in right there. A couple thoughts. One is how the labor movement isn't your grandparents' labor movement anymore. At least it's not my grandparents' union. That the labor movement is international, it's broad, and it is dealing with issues that individual companies don't deal with. Now we see, at least in the US, that our federal government has walked away from many of these issues as well. And so it was really cool to see. To me, I always thought of labor unions as fighting first and foremost for more wages, more job benefits and the like, and seeing some real tangible efforts around the world on how organized labor has worked with companies, with governments to improve the safety for workers in industries like the chemical industry that's rife with hidden and unhidden risks for employees, that organized labor has often stepped up and done some of the work that individual companies might not do on their own. And increasingly, many of our governments are refusing to jump in as well, too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Also seeing similarities across the different contributions was quite nice. But I was also surprised by how open the unionists actually were to this project. So when I reached out to them, they were quite positive. Also, I thought they might not know what a psychologist would want from them or how they could contribute. But so far, we only got positive reactions, both from the contributors, but also from people reading the piece. So it was just very positive.
That's so cool. And yeah, the idea of the role that unions play in the workforce and like the global economy, working with organizations and governments, I think is so much more expansive than people typically think of. And certainly in IO psychology, I don't know. Our history is certainly rooted in union work in some capacity, but then I feel like there's not been a whole lot of attention paid to it for a while, and maybe it's having resurgence as it has a more popular resurgence. Can I get your pulse on that and on what you think the direction of the IO psychology work in unions is?
I've written a fair amount of the history of IO psychology in labor unions in the U.S., and we've been generally ambivalent and at times antagonistic with organized labor, rarely working with labor unions. And there's always been a handful of psychologists who have had positive relationships with organized labor. But in general, it's been a history of indifference. I think things are changing a little bit in that organized labor is stepping up in creative ways that they hadn't done before as well. And, it's hard to be a scholar of work like we all are without paying attention to where's the energy that's happening. And I think one of the reasons that OHS wanted a piece on organized labor is that there'd been a lot of excitement in 2023 and 2024 with organized labor in the US. I mean, Starbucks start unionizing. It's like a new industry that is growing labor unions. The stand-up strike with the UAW members throughout the US was really exciting to watch in 2023. As you saw, I'm right outside of Toledo, which is a UAW town in some ways, and like seeing where that strike was going to happen next created a lot of excitement, and the union won a good contract from that. Seeing the Volkswagen in Chattanooga, Tennessee win a unionization vote, there was a lot of excitement that was happening. And, I hope that us as social scientists of work play a part in this, studying it and trying to understand it, and for some of us to advocate in ways that social scientists can do.
Yeah, I mean, as we're recording right now, the sanitation workers in Philadelphia, I believe, are on strike, and seems like it might be working in their favor as the city piles up with trash.
Good to hear that there's strikes ongoing. As a strike researcher, I'm always happy to hear that. That I would agree with Mike that there's an increase in interest in unions, at least. And also I've just seen the figure again that like 70% of US Americans are in favor of unions. And that's quite promising, I would say. And I would also agree that if now unions become more of a positive thing again in the public, there might also be more interest among researchers to conduct further research. Also, we had a panel discussion some years ago at SciOp about unions, and we also tried to have something similar here in Europe with some symposia on unions. And so we tried to engage more research, and I think this piece could also help to get it to the occupational health people and how they could collaborate and work with unions and do research in this.
Awesome. And so, based on maybe this paper in particular or the broader findings, what is like a key takeaway for either the workers themselves or maybe policymakers around unions and worker safety and health?
I would say for maybe managers and also the employers, it's good to see that unions are not bad per se. So they can be very good or helpful in reducing risks and increasing health and safety, which is also good for the company as such, because people are getting more productive, they're healthier, they also are more motivated. So I would say this could be a good thing for managers. And also I read somewhere that It could also enhance employer reputation if people care about safety and health, especially now with the competitiveness around getting qualified employees. This could be a plus. For workers, of course, they seem to get more aware to the fact that unions can be a source of support for them, not only for workplace grievances, but also maybe for like broader societal issues. At least here in Germany, they also tend to lobby for other things. So this could also be something good for workers.
I just want to jump in, totally second all of those issues. I feel like the workplace in the world is just a scary, uncertain place right now. I mean, we've got, like AI taking over in some ways. We can't control it. We don't know what to do. We have climate change, I'm sure there are still some deniers out there, but it's really hard, I think, in the average worker to think like, how am I going to be safe? I mean, we just came away with like 10, 90 plus days of heat here in Ohio and in June, not July or August. And like, how do you navigate that workplace? And I think employers oftentimes are stressed about these issues too, but they can't always think strategically about them because they're always fighting for the bottom line with these crazy tariffs, with gig work, with political polarization. Like, how do we deal with all of these different things? And, from a worker point of view, I feel like the new labor movement is thinking more broadly on these issues than, many people are aware of. And so I hope this piece, reading through and seeing like how organized labor is working to address all of these different issues can give people a sense of hope that there's somebody out there who's really studying the things that we care about. And I hope more social scientists join thinking broadly about those important issues.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was, as you're talking, thinking about your earlier point about how, at least in the States, government has abdicated, if not like actively antagonized some of these regulations, like around heat stress, with states preventing cities from mandating heat stress-based breaks. But then like OSHA had a policy on heat stress that we covered on the podcast that may or may not actually go into action. And so in something like that, there's organized labor's role, right? Of if you don't have policy, you can at least have this group fighting for you and fighting for your safety in that capacity. And against, your point before, like the organization worrying about employees' heat stress might not, at least in the short term, clearly directly impact your bottom line. Obviously, in the long term, we think that there's benefits to making sure that you have safe and healthy employment. But knowing that the union and organized labor might be taking up the mantle for some of these, I think that's really important.
Yeah, and there are also some examples provided in the piece. I just went through it again, and especially in the O'Brien et al. Contribution, they provide some good examples of existing initiatives that could be also like helpful for policymakers and what can we do, what is already there. They provide some helpful resources, and especially with this climate change things or also mental health issues that are also increasing worldwide, I would say. It's good to see what it is already done somewhere else and how could we implement it in our location or wherever we are. So that's also something nice I really like about our piece, to be honest.
I think it was cool to see how interconnected in some ways the labor organizations are around the world, how they're learning from each other. They're not just sitting around being reactive to these situations, but really trying to get a handle on these important issues, working together.
It's really inspiring and very exciting to see where certainly the research goes, but also the role of unions in the modern workforce goes. I have one last question for the both of you that I am just so excited to hear your answers to. But why do you do this work broadly, not necessarily just as paper, but the research that you do? Denise, do you want to go first?
I think I'm still a bit idealistic and think it's important for us as industrial and organizational psychologists to include all actors that are involved in the workplace. Like Mike already mentioned it, that unions are there. They are one actor when it comes to work. And so I think we are required to also look at what they do, how they see work, how they evaluate workplaces. Even though there might not be a local union at the company we study, but still there might be some policies in place that were done by unions or whatever. So I think it's really important to not neglect unions as players in this world of work.
Yeah, for me, maybe it's a little penance. I studied the history of work, and I got excited. I read this book in graduate school, Servants of Power by Lauren Barrett's, highly recommended, published in 1960. It's a history of social science working with industry, and he made the argument that IO psychology and social science in general had been tools of management and helped fight against workers throughout the early history. And I didn't believe it. I mean, it wasn't what I was told in graduate school. And so one of my first history projects was looking to see how IO psychologists had developed personality tests to try to figure out whether you were likely to join a union or not, that President Roosevelt had outlawed asking. I could no longer ask, are you a member of the union? Do you like unions? That was illegal to ask. So companies turned to IO psychologists to develop these personality tests to try to predict who was going to join a union or not. And that was an assertion that author had made. And my first project basically verified that. And so I feel like industrial organizational psychologists have a lot of work to do to try to regain the trust of people in organized labor over the years, and to try to maybe right some of the wrongs that our field has done over the years too.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I think you both are doing phenomenal work, and I just am so excited that you pulled this piece together and took time out to join us. Thank you again, and bye.
Thank you.
See ya.
Healthy Work is a podcast written and executive produced by Keaton Fletcher and Mariana Arvon. This episode is produced, mixed, and edited by Keaton Fletcher. Artwork is by Keaton Fletcher. And our music is Zero, Microsong by Steve Combs. Please like us, follow us, and subscribe on whatever podcasting software you use. And please leave a review on the iTunes Store. It really does help get us out there.